Started somewhat soon, so feel free to take your seats. If you have to run to the restroom or grab some refreshments first, please feel free to do so. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're really happy to have you all here. All right, we're going to be getting started. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Carla Vila. I'm one of the social justice team leads here in the League of Women Voters St. Petersburg area chapter. Next to me is Tanya. She is our League of Women Voters president of the North Pinellas chapter, and Jackie. She's our president of the League of Women Voters St. Pete area chapter. It is an honor to have our amazing panelists with us tonight to share their knowledge, expertise, and insights with us about the fight for immigrants' rights and the state of immigration. Our panelists are advocates, they are educationists, and they are activists leading the fight for immigration rights in our state. In just a moment, Jackie will share with you some history around the name of our event tonight, Yearning to Breathe Free. Then our panelists will introduce themselves with their names, pronouns, titles, and organizations. After introductions, we'll ask panelists to discuss their area of expertise and what inspired them to work on immigrants and immigrants' rights issues. Then we'll have some follow-up questions for the panelists. And finally, we'll have some time for audience Q&A. So if you would like to submit questions to the panelists, there are index cards on the table just outside the sanctuary under the With Love sign where you can write your questions down. Just as a housekeeping reminder, there are bathrooms on both sides of the sanctuary, right after you walk out those doors, to the left or to the right. But first, I have the pleasure of introducing Tanya, our president of the North League chapter, for some brief words. We hope you leave tonight inspired and empowered to do everything you can to stand with immigrants. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for coming out, and thanks to some of the members I see from North Pinellas for making the drive down here and joining us for this important evening. I wanted to say that, you know, before we start this evening, when we look at the news and you think about immigration and we see the images on the television and we see the due process being violated for people, I want us to just stop and just take a moment and think that these are people, these are someone's sisters, someone's brothers, someone's aunties, someone's grandmother, and these are real people that we're talking about with immigration. So if you could just join me in a moment of silence to honor all the people who are in the trenches working for immigrants, but also all the immigrants themselves, their families, and all the livelihoods that have been affected by this. If you could join me in a moment of silence to honor that. Thank you. Thank you. And let's keep in mind, there are human beings at the center of this whole immigration discussion, and we honor them. Right now, I'd like to introduce Jackie Aces, the president of the League of Women Voters for St. Pete.
Good evening, everyone. We live in a time where our government is openly hateful, hostile, and cruel to immigrants. But it hasn't always been like this. The United States was once known for welcoming immigrants, and it was even considered a point of pride. In 1886, the Statue of Liberty was proudly placed on what we now call Liberty Island. And while the statute's meaning and relevance have evolved with time, its most notable association is with welcoming immigrants. In 1903, a plaque engraved with the New Colossus poem was placed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. With that, Lady Liberty's significance grew as an inspiration to the more than 12 million immigrants who sailed past her on their way to the United States. If you know the poem, say it along with me. It reads, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed, sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name. Mother of exiles, from her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes command. The air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she, with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Tonight is a very serious subject, and we want to give it the seriousness that it deserves. Every day in the news is another heartache that we must witness. And so I just want to say my thanks, first of all, to all of you for taking the time. I know you all are very busy for being with us here tonight. We want to take this time first to have you introduce yourselves to the audience. And in addition to your title and your organization, what is it that inspires you or brings you to work on immigrants' rights issues?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Reverend Brittany Leclair. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm the pastor at First United Methodist Church of Pinellas Park. Thank you all for having me tonight. I think what inspires me is the stories of people that I've met along the way. Not too long ago, I had a woman who showed up to my church looking for some food assistance, and at least I thought that's what she was looking for. But when I looked into her eyes and I saw the sorrow and the fear, and I just asked her, "How are you today? How is it with your soul?" She began to cry and was afraid to even talk to me about what was happening in her life. Come to find out, she is a single mother who is an immigrant and undocumented, and had recently lost her job and was afraid to go anywhere. And had a daughter who was about 9 or 10 years old that she was raising at home. And just listening to her story and being able to be a presence with her in solidarity, and to try to provide her some safety and even some of the basic needs that she was struggling to be able to even find because of the fear of going out anywhere, for fear of being deported. That re-inspired me to continue this work because of the people that it really affects in our communities.
Hi, my name is Professor Elizabeth Aranda, and I'm a sociology professor at USF in Tampa, and I'm also director of the Immigrant Wellbeing Research Center, and my pronouns are she and ella. And in terms of, I don't know if inspires the right word, but what motivates me, when I was a college student, California passed Proposition 187 that took away rights from not just undocumented immigrants, but children, the right to go to school even. And that inspired me to be able to collect the stories of people who are disenfranchised and make them public in whatever capacity I could. And that's what I do as a professor. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Renata Bozzetto. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Deputy Director of the Florida Immigrant Coalition. We are a statewide organization, and we serve immigrants that came here for multiple reasons, but I'm yet to meet somebody who doesn't carry hope and the desire to bring a new future, a better future for themselves and their families. So I feel that I'm very honored to be amongst people that find joy, find strength, find resilience, find the drive to pursue something better, even when their history or the place in which they are at is a place of struggle. Just this morning, I had a meeting with some of our coalition members who are here in the Tampa Bay region. They are a refugee organization. And I was talking to Lupepia, who leads their women's group. And she was telling me that their work starts when a refugee arrives, that sometimes they even need to explain how to cook inside an American home, because their dishes might cause it to smoke and make sounds, and people don't understand what it is. And there are some others that come, and there are entrepreneurs, and they are wealthy, and they are investing in building companies. There are scientists, innovators, there are housekeepers, landscapers. Imagine in all this diversity, the shared common goal to make something better. And isn't that what we should all live for? Being together as a community, finding what we share. So that is what inspires me.
My name is Amy Godshall. I am an immigrants' rights attorney with the ACLU of Florida. My pronouns are she, her. When I was in law school, I participated in some immigration clinics, and I was working with clients to help them get asylum or various immigration relief. And just through working with a couple clients, it became very evident that you can spend 100 hours helping one client swim upstream and they might not get it because the system is stacked against them. If you're not white and rich, you're not getting immigration relief, and that's just the way it is. The system is built upon racism, and I think we should be saying that explicitly more often. There's not actually a legal way to come into this country if you don't have money or education or whatever privilege that might be. But a lot of people don't realize that. But when I was learning about how our system actually works, I'm not okay with that. The more I know about it, the more I want to fight against it. And so that's why I joined the ACLU of Florida, so that I can help bring lawsuits that challenge the way our system is operating and oppressing people because of where they were born or the color of their skin.
Is this working? Yes, it is. Okay. All right. So now we're going to change directions and go to asking some of the panelists to share some of the major themes that you're seeing in your respective areas. So starting with you, Renata, can you share us some of the context about this moment and maybe what's different now than previous administrations?
Sure. So this moment only has one thing in common with the prior administrations in the last 3 decades, which is the absence of a comprehensive and humane immigration reform. The absence of a commitment to take action to solve the root causes of the problem and to address it in a way that is commensurate with what we need to supply workers for our labor force, to give families a safe place if they are fleeing war, to ensure that children have the opportunity to grow knowing that mom and dad will stay at home and will be there when they come back from school. So that absence is the only common thing that I've seen over the years, and I see it now. Now, difference, I do see a lot of differences. Let's start with the 1.7 million people, 1.7 million, who have a authorization to live and work in the United States, granted by prior administrations, whether they are parolees or temporary protected status holders, who are now in the verge of losing that status, and they are about to become what some people call undocumented, meaning that they live here, they did the process, they did everything that the government told them to do. They were fingerprinted, they had their background check, they submitted the application, they show up for their appointment. Now they have been living here, they have a work permit and the opportunity to work, and this administration is telling them, no, we are changing course and we're gonna cancel your status. And that starts with 76,000 Hondurans who lost their status yesterday and another 4,000 Nicaraguans who lost their status yesterday. And you probably are asking yourselves, oh, but these are people who just came in. No, our neighbors who lost their status yesterday have been here for more than 20 years. And this is something very different. This administration has told American people that they would go after criminals, that they would be looking for the bad guys. And yet, we are seeing something very horrific, that is our neighbors who are working, our neighbors who have a family, who are now at times homeowners, who are now parents of American children, being asked to leave the country because that authorization is being revoked. We are also seeing something different in terms of how policing is enforced. There is something called 287G agreement, which is a contract that allows local law enforcement to work as immigration police. Immigration is the purview of the federal government. The state government shouldn't be touching it, and Amy can talk much more and much more eloquently about that than I can, but the state government should be away from it. And so should be our local police, because the job of our local police is to keep our communities safe, is to be the first responders when there is a crime, when somebody witnessed a crime, when somebody is victim of a crime. We want our local law enforcement to be ready, to have the time and the talent to do that. So through 287G agreements, our local law enforcement is forced to work as immigration police. Instead of focusing on keeping us safe, they may have they are compelled to divert their resources and their time to enforce immigration. And the issue with this is that those agreements are not new. They are also about 30 years old. But they are so controversial because the baggage that they have, because of the amount of racial profiling that they have enabled over time, that they had been pretty much canceled everywhere. Some states have passed resolutions that they wouldn't, some cities have passed resolutions that they wouldn't allow them to exist in their spaces. So we have moved forward. The government implemented something, realized it was bad, and said, we will not have this anymore. Now what is very different is going backwards, is knowing that something is bad, hurts our communities, and going back to doing it. Not only now 287G agreements are a thing again, but Florida is leading the nation in having it everywhere. Should I even call this leading the nation? Florida is shaming the nation, having it everywhere, right? So what we are having with 287G agreements means that our Florida Highway Patrol is looking for immigrants. Our Fish and Wildlife is looking for immigrants. Your local police is looking for immigrants. Trust me, they are not doing their job because they are focusing on the wrong thing. This is different. I'll say one more thing and then I can pass so we can have a more fruitful conversation with the other panelists as well. But the other difference is detention. Detention, immigrant detention in the country is not divorced from the profiteering universe of private prisons. There are a lot of profiteers making money off detaining people. And the immigration realm, it's really disgusting. I had the opportunity to visit immigrant detention centers in the state before and meet people under detention. Many of them are working for $1 a day in the kitchen or $2 a day in the kitchen, and you would think, oh, they're there and they are working. They are working there so they can eat the scrap food of the others. And that is disgusting. What is different about this moment is that in addition to having this profiteering universe, we have the state now attempting to create camps, such as the one horrifically named Alligator Alcatraz, that do not have, that I would say put people in a limbo, because those sites, in the fight on whether they are managed by the federal government or managed by the state, individuals would try to go to court, and their court hearings would be just canceled because the judge would say, oh, this is a state facility, it's not under my jurisdiction. So we have a complete denial of due process that it's so explicit. People being sent to El Salvador remove their due process in a way that it's so cruel, because once they are outside of our country, there is very little that we can intervene, right? So this is all very new, and to the extent that it's cruel. It's very new, and it's also very cruel. So I think the moment is a moment of many, many challenges. I should say that to add to the new moment something that gives me hope is that it's also a moment that people like you are realizing that this is unacceptable. That we are, of course, much more needs to be done, but we are understanding very clearly that this is not what we stand for as a nation. We have constitutional rights. People shouldn't be ripped up from their children by masked men who cannot identify themselves. They shouldn't be taken to a detention facility and be disappeared from the system for days. Do you know we get calls in our hotline from wives that are looking for their husbands that were taken on the road, did not come back, and for 5 days they have no idea where the person is because the person just doesn't show up on the locators for ICE. So the fact that we are having more people aware of this and saying that this is unacceptable, this gives me hope. This is a little bit different.
Thank you. I want to ask Professor Aranda, if you could talk a little bit about the emotional aspect of this, the unseeable consequences of the moment, and what you know about how this moment is impacting immigrants and mixed status families and communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to explain before I start addressing that my research team conducted a study this summer in which we interviewed about 53 a combination of immigrants with various legal status and US-born adult children of these immigrants. So we had a range of political statuses, but also different origins, Latin America, the Caribbean, countries in Africa. And the one thing that we found across all of these interviews was that people were in a constant state of fear. They were afraid that they could be detained or deported. But above all, it was what that signified, that they would be separated from their families. So parents afraid that they'd be separated from their children, and the adult children we interviewed afraid they'd be separated from their parents. The families developed plans, not all of them, but I would say at least half of them, a contingency plan in case somebody got detained, what would happen? And the first sort of stopgap measure was don't go out to prevent it. So people were in a social isolation that was so extreme, they were comparing it to the COVID lockdown, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. For young children, they're growing up in an environment of deep uncertainty. One mother told us, quote, "My daughter goes to school and always arrives and says, 'Mama, I was afraid that when I got home you wouldn't be here.' And always, every day, she'd get to the bus stop and says, 'Mom, you're here.'" Young adults and children were in deep distress. Young adult children who were citizens or had DACA started to take on adult responsibilities prematurely to keep their parents safe. So these are basically US citizens standing in the line of fire to take the fire off their parents. The young adults internalized this fear, and a lot of times they had to shift their own ambitions and their own plans to basically help their parents. So they would delay their education or just stop out of school. If they had jobs, they scaled back because parents, especially those without documentation, were afraid to drive. And so those teenagers were volunteering to drive for them. There was no coercion here. These kids were stepping up. Participants described a quiet reversal of roles, children becoming drivers and logistical coordinators for parents unable to safely move about public life. One mom told us, quote, "My daughters tell me not to worry, that they'll go to the grocery store, they'll go to the clinic. They have taken on the role of providing security to do that for us." In addition to this, many immigrants that we spoke with stopped going to work, or they scaled back work, anything to get them off the roads because they knew that the roads were being heavily policed. They talked about instability of jobs and exploitation. The jobs that they could find were short-term, underpaid, and offered no recourse in cases of abuse. The ones who typically would have been traveling north for the harvest didn't go. So that meant no income for the family. And so these vulnerabilities obviously extend beyond the workplace, and they bleed into different dimensions of life. As their income sources dried up, the ability to sustain an independent household also began to erode. And so to adapt to the rising housing cost and the loss of income, some participants reported having to sell their homes, others downsized or moved in with adult children to consolidate expenses. One participant whose adult son had been recently detained and he had a family, described offering her living room as a temporary refuge for his family, anticipating that they would soon be unable to afford rent because they lost his income. So all of this was worsened by transportation restrictions, and they compounded challenges. People were avoiding entire neighborhoods or highways because they knew where the checkpoints were. And I won't disclose how they knew that because I don't want to out their strategies for survival. There was an intense fear of the police to the point that when we asked them, what if you're a victim of crime, what will you do? They would not call the police. They will not call the police. But they had the wherewithal to explain, but if I witness a crime, I'll call, but I'm going to call anonymously. So that tells you they still want to be good citizens of their communities, but they just don't want to be detained and deported. And that was just fascinating to us. In terms of healthcare, people were foregoing healthcare, skipping appointments, relying on herbal remedies, rather than risk contact with law enforcement in healthcare settings because the Trump administration removed the protections for sensitive locations like schools, churches, and hospitals. One woman told us, quote, "Today I missed my dental appointment because I don't have anyone to take me." And she was in pain, mind you. She said, "My daughter doesn't want me to drive because she's scared and says, if they grab you, what are we gonna do?" So she said, "No, and could I hang on?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can hang on because I'm scared to even go to the store." People were afraid to carry on with their daily lives. They were very cognizant that they were also being racially profiled, which now the Supreme Court has basically said is perfectly legal. Even our legal residents, the ones with legal status, and US citizens were being afraid of driving because they were also afraid they'd be detained or deported, and I'll speak more about that in a moment as well. So this led to this voluntary social isolation and grave effects on the mental health. Some people equated it, like I said earlier, to the COVID quarantine. One woman said, quote, "This immigration thing is another COVID because now it's a struggle for survival, to survive. In COVID times, you'd arrive from the grocery store and you changed outside your home because you felt like you had caught COVID, but now you feel someone is following you and your anxiety rises, the fear." People reported symptoms consistent with chronic stress and trauma, dealing with very high levels of anxiety, depression, insomnia, loss of appetite, hypervigilance. And I'm not just talking about the adults, I'm talking about their children, their adult children and their young children. They spoke of the emotional toll of trying to stay strong for their families while internally they were unraveling. They relied on churches and they relied on their faith as emotional support, even though some of them reported that they didn't feel like they could go to church because they were afraid that ICE would show up there. And finally, some of our interviews were with people who had been detained and then released on bond. Mind you, weeks and weeks after they were detained, they were released on bond. They talked about the psychological and physical abuse that they experienced. The constant overt hostility basically characterized their time in custody. They were socially isolated. They went through hunger. They endured freezing temperatures. They were dealing with lingering trauma after the release, people in silence, dealing with depression, distrust of everybody. One participant who was detained for several weeks said, quote, "I knew it was daytime because I would talk to my wife during the day, but when nighttime came, I would spend all night with my eyes open because I couldn't sleep because of the light. There were 78 of us in there, all on the floor, laying there, putting up with the cold because they set the air to freezing temperatures, without eating, without bathing, without being able to relieve yourself, without anything, confusing the day for the night and the night for the day." Referring to now being out of detention, he said, quote, "I still haven't adapted." The abuse wasn't limited to those who were undocumented. We tend to think it's them, right? The other who's going through this. It's not. This young man's mother told us what happened to his wife. When he was detained, she was in the car with him. And his mother told us, quote, "They grabbed her. She's from Puerto Rico, and they threw her to the ground. They kicked her, and she said she was a citizen, and they didn't believe her. She was pregnant at the time, unbeknownst to her, and she miscarried." So in spite of this severe criminalization of immigrants, participants rejected that criminal narrative, and they asserted that they were here, they contributed to this country and our society, and that maybe if they came across without papers, they were willing to pay a penalty, but it had to fit the crime. They were willing to make amends, but they felt like they were being really and harshly treated because they asserted that they made these decisions for the well-being of their families. Some of them were thinking of leaving the United States, but most were standing firm, stating that this was their home and they had the right to be here. They have roots in Florida and they were not willing to relinquish them. So the strength really came through in our interviews. And many of the parents wanted to remain so their children would have opportunities, and they didn't want to separate from them. So in that regard, love really becomes an act of endurance for them, staying in a hostile environment, not out of safety, but out of obligation to their children's future. I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Professor. All right, next, Amy Godshall from the ACLU of Florida. Can you share with us any legal updates? What are the lawsuits that the ACLU is currently working on in Florida, or other lawsuits out there by other organizations related to immigration?
Yeah, thank you all for joining us tonight. And I agree, it's a very serious, somber, difficult thing to talk about, but I appreciate you all investing in this conversation. And please help us spread the word about what's actually happening, because it's not what's in the news. Just to start with some context, immigration detention has been horrific for a long, long time now. That's not new. We've been, at the ACLU of Florida, we've been litigating immigration detention conditions, atrocities, for a long time now. Just to give you two examples of some of the cases of clients who were in ICE detention before January, one of our current clients was at the Baker County Detention Center in McClenny, Florida, near Jacksonville. He was having mental health episodes, and ICE wanted him to sign voluntary departure forms, but he didn't want to because he was afraid of returning to his country of origin. And so ICE decided to put him in solitary confinement for 88 days, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in a room with no windows with people laughing at you and throwing food at you for 88 days. He had another mental health episode, and a Baker officer punched him in the ear, and his ear started bleeding, and he has permanent damage. In one of our other cases, also from the Baker County Detention Center, our client, who was there a couple years ago, these are not new issues, she had entered immigration detention as a survivor of human trafficking. She had PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of these documented. She was on medication for it. She had a treatment plan. But of course, when she was taken ICE detention, they didn't care about keeping up with her medications or any of the ways she had learned to move on from what she had been subjected to. And so one day an officer came to take her pod out for rec, and she said she needed to use the bathroom first because she needed to change her pad. And the officer started yelling at her and saying no, and they took her to solitary and never got her a pad. And so she started freaking out and having a panic attack while she was in solitary. And long story short, they put her in solitary for 30 days when she had, instead of giving her any mental health care, she started self-harming while she was in solitary, because that's what happens when someone is put in solitary and tortured. So male guards stripped her and put her in a restraint chair and laughed at her while her breasts were exposed for hours. So this is what ICE detention has been for a long time. And I'm thrilled that people are finally starting to pay attention to how bad it is. But I just want to emphasize that these atrocities are not new. The part that's new, as Renata was talking about, is how it's going unchecked, how there is even less transparency and accountability for what ICE is doing behind the scenes and what Florida State has started to do. So some of the lawsuits that we have brought as the ACLU of Florida since January pertain to the Everglades immigration internment camp, which a lot of people have been referring to as Alligator Alcatraz, but we don't use that racist trope of a name. So one of our lawsuits is about access to counsel at the facility, because it's run by state agencies and state contractors, and they have not been following First Amendment requirements for providing access to confidential communications with counsel. They have not been allowing attorneys to visit their clients. They have not been providing private areas for meetings or phone calls. They currently have no way to facilitate legal mail and exchanging of confidential documents between attorneys and their clients. All of these are basic requirements that all immigration detention facilities should be providing based on the national detention standards that ICE puts out for immigration detention facilities, but also based on the First Amendment of the Constitution. So that's one of our ongoing lawsuits against the facility to make sure people have access to counsel. And just for awareness too, access to counsel is crucial for people who are in ICE detention, both so that they can defend against their deportation, because if you don't have an attorney who can talk to you and help draft your filings for your case, you're not gonna get relief in immigration court. But also to speak out and defend civil rights about what torturous conditions they're experiencing while in ICE detention. Our second lawsuit against the Everglades detention facility right now pertains to how the state of Florida is claiming to be running this facility pursuant to their 287G agreements, which Renata touched on earlier. As she explained, 287G agreements come from the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's an agreement between the federal government and ICE and the state local law enforcement agency. Here, the state of Florida is claiming that because of some of the departments of the state have 287G agreements, that gives them the authority to run this ICE detention center. But that's not how 287G agreements work. 287G agreements allow certain officers who are in those departments to be properly trained and deputized to perform certain immigration enforcement activities on behalf of ICE. They don't categorically give a whole department the authority to run an ICE detention, and running an ICE detention center is not one of the things on the list that they're then allowed to do once deputized. Our other lawsuit is going to the foundational purported authority for how they're running this facility. One of the other big cases against the Everglades facility is, I'm not on that case, it's not an ACLU Florida case, but it's the Friends of the Everglades case. It's the environmental NEPA lawsuit. That case had gotten a preliminary injunction a couple weeks ago to close the facility while the case was pending, and unfortunately last week the 11th Circuit stayed the preliminary injunction, which means that the facility can continue to operate while the case progresses. So they get to continue running that. Those are the main new lawsuits since January, but we also have lawsuits against some of the Florida, so for example, in the past legislative session, the state of Florida passed what they call SB4C. It prohibits certain immigrants from entering or re-entering the state of Florida depending on their status, which is not something that a state is allowed to regulate. That is something that only the federal government can regulate. And so we sued, I believe it was in March, and got a preliminary injunction, so the state cannot enforce that right now. But unfortunately, they had continued to enforce it after we got the preliminary injunction, so it turned into a bigger issue. But we're continuing to fight these fights in court as much as we can. But as less and less public officials are respecting judges and their authority, that's becoming challenging as well. So we really need your all's support to change the public opinion about these immigration issues right now and to help hold our officials accountable for what they're doing.
Hello, thank you so much, Amy. Just one quick follow-up. You mentioned the access to counsel case at the Everglades Detention Center. What is the status of that case?
Yeah, so we had filed in the Southern District of Florida, had a preliminary injunction hearing and finished that briefing, and then they transferred it to the Middle District of Florida because the judge thought that venue was more proper. And so we are in the process of filing an amended complaint. We had a status conference last week in Fort Myers with the new judge on the case, and she wanted the plaintiffs to update the filing since the original complaint and preliminary injunction motion were for about a month and a half old, and the defendants, the state of Florida, had made a few concessions and made a couple things better. So the judge wanted updated documents that clearly show what are the current problems and constitutional deficiencies in what's happening. And I'm realizing I forgot to mention what claims are part of that case. So that case, we originally brought claims against the state of Florida and the federal government under the First Amendment for not providing access to confidential attorney-client communications. Like I said before, that part is ongoing. And then we also had a claim about how people who were held at the Everglades facility did not have an immigration court that was exercising jurisdiction over their bond claims. like Renata had said before also. So they fixed that issue before we even got to, I think it was the first preliminary injunction hearing in the Southern District of Florida. The defendants conceded that they had to do that, and so they fixed that part. So that's a shadow victory on that part of it. They did what we wanted, and so we agreed to drop that claim. But we're still fighting for the First Amendment continued access to attorney-client confidential communications at the facility.
Thank you. Pastor Brittany, I want to talk about what you described to me as our moral responsibility to center and honor the human dignity of immigrant communities. And I want to talk about your on-the-ground stories and the organizing that has gone into the vigils and that you have participated in at the Everglades Detention Center. If you could share those stories with us.
Yeah, so I think a common thread here, recurring theme that I'm hearing tonight is I don't want to say disbelief, but I think the anger and the disheartening fact in hearing that people are being treated as less than human. And that's one of the things that concerns me the most about all of this, is that there are policies and there are people in power who continue to label and treat and name human beings as less than human in the way that we see that being played out in what's happening across the nation right now. And for me, that's deeply disturbing when we think about our humanity, right? We're in a place and time right now where I think it's becoming more and more normal to not see one another as human beings. And so I think at the very heart of this conversation is the fight for humanity. A woman by the name of Betty Osceola, who is one of the tribal leaders of the Miccosukee tribe in the Everglades, has been leading some of a prayer vigil alongside an organization called the Worker Circle, and many different people from all different faith traditions and non-faith traditions as well. The last few weeks. And we've been meeting down at the Everglades outside of the cruelly named alligator Alcatraz, just right across the street from the sign. And one of the things that she opens with every time that we gather together is that the Creator has called her to bring back humanity and to bring back the ability to see one another in our fullness as humans. These vigils are happening every Sunday from 5 to 6 p.m. And the one that I had an opportunity to attend, I've been to one so far. We decided early on, working with the Florida Immigration Coalition as well, that we would kind of regionalize so that we wouldn't burn out so quickly, because we recognize that this is a long fight right now. Even as you were saying, Amy, about the injunction, we really thought that was, and it was, a big win. I don't want to downplay that at all. The Friends of the Everglades and everybody who's been working so diligently on that was a big win. There was a stop. And now, as we expected, there has been pushback. And so we know that this is going to be a long fight. And in that, we decided to regionalize. So we've had different groups taking different Sundays so that regionally we would have a presence outside of Alligator Alcatraz every single Sunday evening until this camp is shut down. Because we are not going to give up, and we're going to keep showing up, and we've been able to maintain that every week so far. I think we've had about 6 or 7 weeks thus far, and we fully intend, we need, a shameless plug here, sorry, but we need everybody to show up. whatever faith tradition you are, if you're not part of a faith tradition, you're a person of conscience, of morality, you believe in the humanity of each and every person that is created, we need you to show up. Bring your signs. It is a nonviolent prayer vigil, of course. But to see everybody just coming together, Renata, you talked about the hope that you have. My hope is being restored daily and seeing the number of diverse people that are showing up from all different walks of life to say, this is not okay, and I'm not going to sit back, and I'm not going to just let this happen, but I'm going to show up, and I'm going to use my voice, and I'm going to use my body and my presence to speak out and to claim and name the abuse and the harm that's happening. So if you are interested, we'd love to have you down at the Everglades on Sunday from 5 to 6. The one that I went to, we did take a bus. We were able to secure a charter bus, and we had over 280 people that showed up outside of Alligator Alcatraz. And so there's a place for everybody. And you know what? If you can't make it down there, think about how you might be able to organize a vigil or some sort of a gathering in your community where you are, because we need as much people power as possible. That's how this is going to change, is for everyday, ordinary people deciding to do something about it. We had last Sunday, there was a vigil while what was happening in the Everglades, also happening outside the Capitol in Tallahassee as well. People regionalizing up there and saying, no, we're not going to sit back. We're going to join our siblings across the state and across the nation in this work. So, yeah, it's tough. Also, I was talking with one of my colleagues this past week, who's the pastor here at Allendale, Reverend Andy Oliver, and we were talking about how, during the time of slavery, it probably seemed really silly or even absurd for people to walk around saying, we're going to abolish slavery. And look where we are today. So I think it's so important for us to prophetically proclaim and witness, to abolish ICE, to shut down these camps, and to proclaim the humanity, the dignity of every single person that we look into the eyes in. Thank you.
Thanks, Reverend Brittany. All right, so we're going to move to some questions and answers to some of the panelists. These may be directed at a specific person, but please feel free to jump in if you have information that you would like to share. So first, I'd like to follow up with you, Renata. Can you share with us what Flick is doing to fight back and grow the connections, capacity, and consciousness of communities and to strengthen the pro-immigrant power in Florida?
Yes, thank you. So Flick, our fight is multifaceted, right? So it requires different layers of action. One is the issue advocacy. Even though we have a state with a track record of being unfriendly to pro-immigrant causes, that we have a federal government that it's also showing its claws in ways that are very scary, we still need to advocate. And we advocate to make sure that our elected officials understand that this should not be happening and will not happen under our watch. So issue advocacy doesn't stop because we are in a horrific context. We cannot afford that it stops. We do a lot of issue advocacy also at the local level, particularly because of the 287G agreements. In the state of Florida, pretty much every county is required to have an agreement with ICE because the county oversees the jail. So the sheriff is required to have an agreement with ICE. Anyone else is not required. That means issue advocacy needs to be at every municipal level, at every leader of our municipalities, at every university. What is that university police is now asking students where they come from and what they are doing here? This is insane. So issue advocacy, we cannot afford forgetting that. Second is services. As we heard, the needs are tremendous and they are they vary in size and context. So we have legal screening clinics in which we not only provide access to pro bono attorney counsel for everyone, but we also help parents to complete a guardianship, which is the paperwork that would assign a guardian in case of an emergency to their children so they don't go into foster care. They also help individuals with power of attorney. Imagine what it means to go back to your country of origin when you have a house or a car or a job in the US and you need to transfer that, so attorneys help with that. We also provide our hotline is connected with the Rapid Response Alliance for Immigrant Safety and Empowerment, which ACLU is a co-lead in that process, in that project. Our hotline receives both reports of violations as well as requests for support. And we field this to an entire network, including attorneys who can defend people's civil liberties as well as immigration. And lastly is education. Education in all levels. We need to talk to our neighbors. Our neighbors need to understand that we are impacted by this, whether we want it or not. The 300 million that they state, 200 million plus, that they state wasted in building the Everglades detention camp came from your tax dollars and mine. Our neighbors need to know that. Our neighbors need to know that who is funding the atrocities is us, and we should not allow that. And I can give a local example of volunteers who are leading the Empowered Community Hubs. It's really like people getting together to figure it out how we can implement accompaniment to court. How can we implement transportation for our neighbors? How can we get the issue campaigns going? So I'm sorry I went too long, but we do have a lot of opportunities for you to get involved if you wish to. And you can go to flick.org under volunteer to join an orientation, and we will gladly connect you with the ACLU and all of our local partners and state partners who are doing amazing work.
Is this on? Okay, great. What is or will be the impact that we will feel of a shrinking immigrant population? I'll start with you, Professor, and then I'll open it up to the others as well.
I think we're already starting to feel it. And I think Florida, like as you said earlier, is leading or taking us back in this regard. Florida passed SB 1718 2 years ago, and that was sort of a pilot test of what we're seeing at the national level, I think, in some ways. And we've seen that there are certain sectors of the economy that have not been doing as well because the immigrant labor force is basically the people who, if you look at the percentages in sectors like construction, hospitality, farm work, immigrants are disproportionately represented in those sectors. By having a law like 1718, which cracked down on employers in a variety of ways, those immigrants can't really work there anymore. And so you have fruit that goes without picking. You have homes that are being constructed over a longer time period than people might have expected. You hear stories of people who are reconstructing their homes after the hurricanes and how there aren't enough contractors or construction workers available to do those things. All of those are effects of 1718. Some people, and we did a survey last year about the effects of that law. We surveyed almost 500 people about it, and at least 42% knew someone who had left the state because of that law. Now imagine that, the reduction in the labor force, the contraction of the tax base because immigrants of all legal statuses pay into the tax base, and people's relationships with immigrants of all legal statuses. You might not realize it, but when that person is gone, they leave a hole. Maybe it's your child's best friend, or, I mean, these are people who are gone now because of our policies. So at a national level, I think we're gonna start feeling it even more in the coming year and after that. But the ramifications of a contracting immigration population are so multifaceted and really seep into every area of social life that we're not gonna realize it until it hits us in the face.
So I think the human impact is very real and tangible to us who are in the weeds about it. So prior to January, there were about 40,000 people in ICE detention, and that's doubled already since January, and Trump has plans to continue expanding that. And 70% of people in ICE detention across the country have no criminal record at all. They're not just getting rid of people with criminal records like they're saying they are, but they're taking good, hardworking people from our communities, and we're already feeling the effects of that. I forget what month it was in, but during this last legislative session this spring, the legislatures in DeSantis were already talking about how we're feeling the effects of not having enough people, labor shortages, and so they proposed having children work overnight shifts on school nights. Like, they're already acknowledging that that's a problem. They're just not willing to say, okay, maybe we need immigrants and should respect their contributions to our state. So that's.
Thank you. The next question is open to all the panelists, but whoever has an input would like to respond. So the Tampa Bay Times reports that in Florida, about 500,000 people are in immigration court proceedings, and nearly 370,000 of those lack a lawyer. In Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco and Polk counties, our counties around here, fewer than 1 in 4 immigrants has a lawyer. The article attributes this to the high cost of legal fees, or the high fees associated with obtaining legal support. So, question to the panel is, how can we support immigrants in proceedings? Are you aware of funds that we can donate to? And/or, this is like a 3-part question, are there steps that we can help with, in terms of like filling out forms or applications, anything that we can do?
I can start with that and then I'll pass it around. Yeah, so there have been people without immigration attorneys for a long time because there's just not enough immigration attorneys, and so encourage more people to go to law school to help with that. But a shorter term solution is to help fund organizations doing this work. A lot of organizations since January have lost funding for this work because the government is trying to make it even harder to get an immigration attorney. If you look at the statistics, if you don't have an attorney, you're not going to get relief in immigration court. And it's even harder when you're in detention and can't contact your attorney, even if you are lucky enough to have one. But yes, donate to organizations that are doing this work. Americans for Immigrant Justice is a great one. Florida Legal Services, there's a ton of them that you can donate to that have lost funding since January and are able to do less and less of this work. And organizations like Flick as well, Flick's website, AC Florida's website can help you find answers to these questions.
At this time, we want to ask each of our panelists if you could give a call to action for everyone here in the audience. We've heard you mention a couple of ways. Please elaborate or feel free to emphasize the different ways that we as community members can show up in this moment for our immigrant friends and neighbors and communities.
I mentioned showing up out at the Everglades or hosting your own vigil of some sort or gathering in your community. I also want to just mention like the power of just presence wherever you are. There was a man, he may still be out there. I haven't been in a few weeks, so I'm not sure, but we met a man named Josh who was out at the Everglades, and he's probably in his early 70s and was standing outside at the time that I met him for 8 days straight. Excuse me. And he was holding a sign that in just very simple letters said, "Free them." Free them. I don't want us to underestimate the power of just showing up wherever you are, using your voice, using the resources that you have to speak out and to name, again, this injustice and claim to free them.
I think everybody knows what they can do and what their limits are. And not everybody can maybe get on a bus, even though it's a very, very worthy thing to do. But one thing that we all have are smartphones. And we can put our congresspeople on speed dial and call every freaking day, and tell them, we don't like the atrocities that we're hearing about. Change it. So that's something, I mean, my kids are doing that. If my kids are doing that, we all can do that.
Thank you, and second to both. I guess the bad news of this moment is that it's so overwhelming and so much going on. But the good news is that when there is so much going on, that means we have many opportunities to act, right? We can, with Flick and our members, you can volunteer virtually. We provide free support completing forms, citizenship applications, and you are thinking, wow, those who are eligible to become a citizen are maybe not the most vulnerable. But guess what? Them becoming citizens, they might be protecting another family member who is more vulnerable. They get the right to vote. They get the opportunity to have their status in a permanence that as a legal permanent resident, they don't. So all of this is important, and you can help online via Zoom, 2 hours of your time. You can take the bus, you can call the elected officials. You can get a group to go to your local municipal government and demand that they get away, that they terminate ICE agreements. And this, they will probably gonna say, oh, but it is a state requirement. No, I can send you transcripts. The attorney defending the state just said in court, it's on record. Nobody other than the sheriff is required to sign those agreements. So just let us know. If you need tools, if you need language, if you need flyers to give out in your neighborhood, if you want to share Know Your Rights cards with your community members, if you want to find out how to drive somebody, how to join an accompaniment program in court, all of this is possible. You don't need to do all of it, but anything that you can do is going to be very, very impactful.
I just want to add to what Renata said. We do have Know Your Rights red cards just outside, so if you do want some of those, yeah, there you go, Pastor Brittany. Please take some. Sorry, Amy, back over to you.
Yeah, I agree with that. There are a lot of things that you can do, big and small, do whatever fits your life right now. I understand everyone's got a lot going on these days. There are programs that you can get. You can volunteer with FLIC, with ACLU of Florida, with different organizations that are part of our coalition. You can go through trainings and become a legal observer. You don't have to be an attorney to be a legal observer, but then when there's an ICE raid in your community, you can go and document what's happening so that we have a record of it, so that once we see a lot of racial profiling happening, we can bring a lawsuit about it. There's a lot of things that you can help us monitor what's happening. You can sign up for our new program where you can accompany people to immigration court, because a lot of people are getting arrested while they're going to court right now. That's not supposed to be happening, and so you can go and be the person that goes along with them to accompany them and to document what's happening at immigration courts. You can go visit ICE detention centers and speak with people and just listen to them and hear what they're going through, and then talk to your community members, talk to journalists, help increase transparency about what's actually happening behind bars in ICE detention. People don't always know you're allowed to visit ICE detention, and each facility has their own policies for that, but you should be allowed to visit people in ICE detention. I absolutely agree. You should call all of your representatives, state and national, tell them this is not okay. You are not, you don't approve of what's happening, because honestly, at the end of the day, we need better laws. A lot of this is hard to litigate when our laws are condoning it. So we need to start at the top as well, in addition to the everyday things that you can do to support your communities.
I'm just going to put my professor hat on for a second and say, if you're feeling overwhelmed by all of this, it's because it's by design. It's like Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. They are rolling these things out intensely, and you saw how it happened in the first few months, because every shock, you're just sort of like paralyzed, and then the other one comes, and the other one comes, and that's the plan, so that you can't act because you're so overwhelmed, and then they pass what they want to pass, which they did. But that's where I would say, pick one or two issues that you're really passionate about. If you're here tonight, I'm guessing this is one of them. But if not, just pick one or two issues you're passionate about and identify, what can I do in this realm? Don't feel like you have to take it all on, because we have our families, we have our jobs, and we have our own mental health to take care of, right? They say in the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first and then put your child's on. And I always wondered, no, it should be backwards. But they're right, because if you're drowning, you can't help anyone else. So you need to take care of yourself too. So prioritize those things, but pick one or two things and then decide, what can I do within the scope of what's possible, and just sustain it. And if everybody did that, I really think we'd see some changes. So.
I have one additional call to action, and then I would like us to take some time to take some questions from the audience, and we have a few good ones. The final call to action I want to present is from an organization who I believe is a client of the ACLU of Florida, and that's Sanctuary of the South. Sanctuary of the South is one of the clients in the Access to Counsel case, and they provide no to low-cost legal services to immigrants who are facing deportation, detention, and abuse. As you've learned, there are no public defenders, there are no attorneys in immigration court. So immigrants with lawyers do have 5 times more likely the chance of being able to win. There are 2.5 million people without lawyers, and 600,000 of those are children. So Sanctuary of the South is launching a GoFundMe next week or soon to support these cases. And if you have any questions and you want to help Sanctuary of the South, please see Jess afterwards. Jess, raise your hand. She's in the back right now. Thank you for being here, Jess, on behalf of Sanctuary of the South, and for all the work you all do. With that, we're going to start taking some audience questions. We've talked a lot tonight about the 287 agreements. My understanding is St. Petersburg, the city of St. Petersburg, has a 287 agreement, as well as many other departments across Tampa Bay area. Is there a process to leave these agreements? And if so, how do we push our local law enforcement agencies to dissolve their ties with ICE? That's a question to anyone.
Yes, St. Pete has a 287G agreement. According to Florida state laws, counties with county jails have to have 287G agreements, but local police departments do not have to. Law enforcement agencies are required to use their best efforts. That's what the terms of the Florida law. They have to use their best efforts to support federal immigration enforcement, but that's not equivalent to having a 287G agreement. As Renata was saying, there's a lawsuit out there right now where the city of South Miami is challenging the state governor and attorney general's assertions that all police departments have to have 287G agreements or else they're in violation of the best efforts clause and that they're in violation of the state's prohibition on sanctuary city policies. But as we've been arguing, and that case is showing that, let me back up for a second, because I'm realizing I'm in the weeds on all of these issues, and not everyone is as in the weeds as I am. So a lot of local law enforcement agencies, city commissioners, have been contemplating since January whether or not they should sign 287G agreements. A few cities have pushed back. Fort Myers voted no on their 287G proposal, and DeSantis and State Attorney General Uthmeier sent them a letter saying, we're going to remove you from office if you don't change this vote and vote yes, because you're in violation of the best efforts clause and the anti-sanctuary city policy. I don't think their legal arguments are very strong, but we'll see what this lawsuit says. So City of South Miami filed a lawsuit to say, well, the state governor and the state attorney general are saying that we all have to do this, but I don't think that's what the state law actually says police departments have to do. And so they asked the judge to issue declaratory relief, which means the judge is going to basically answer their question and declare whether or not they do or do not have to sign a 287G agreement. So long story short, that's all kind of playing out in the City of South Miami case. And if St. Pete wanted to terminate their 287G agreement, they should look to the City of South Miami case to see what the state governor and attorney general have said in that case is or is not required. I think that's pretty telling as to whether or not they would be violating Florida state law if they were to terminate it. It's a bit more complicated than that, so I don't want to say they could just do it and it's easy. I think they should get an attorney to look at it. I would be happy to speak with the City of St. Pete if they wanted to look into that. But I don't think it would be a violation of state law, but it's not as simple as that.
To add to that? Yes. Okay, sorry. The Tampa Bay Immigration Coalition just kicked off a campaign to end 287G agreements here in the Tampa Bay area. In fact, they did it at this church on Saturday. So if that is something you're interested in participating in, the Tampa Bay Immigration Coalition is a good resource. Right now, they're asking for all of us to contact our city officials. I know you've talked about that before. Not city officials, our Congress officials, right? The people, state officials. Thank you, guys. Sorry. So please contact your state officials. Okay, so the next question is, several of the panelists have mentioned getting the word out. What are the best ways to get the word out?
I will start. Social media good, but not enough. Algorithms will gonna cut your options short and show your message only to people who look like you. So we need more. I would love Pastor Brittany's shirt. That makes a statement, a sign, like the person that you mentioned that was in the Everglades detention camp. If you have the opportunity to participate in a public demonstration or to attend a public event in which you can express, that is incredibly powerful at this moment. You can still use your social media, you can still send text message to your friends, that is fine, but speaking out and in the public is very important so your neighbors understand where you are standing. And they can look at you and say, wow, if my neighbor is doing this and my other neighbor is doing this, that means there is value in that claim. So that is where I would start.
Thank you. What is the concern for naturalized citizens? Is there a risk for them as well?
Well, I can just speak from the people that we interviewed. Their concerns are that, I think there's been rumors of an Office of Denaturalization. And so they're afraid that they could be stripped of their citizenship. The same with, we've seen at this point legal permanent residents get detained. We saw in the data that I presented to you a U.S. citizen be detained for 5 hours because they wouldn't believe her that she was a citizen. This is a racial project at the end of the day. This relies on racial profiling, and it's built upon racism. So those fears it's just such the culture, the environment of fear is so pervasive that any status that's not U.S.-born citizen, and even then, our data show that the U.S.-born citizens are afraid too, but they're more afraid for their family members. So yeah, that fear of denaturalization. I can't speak to the legality of that, but there are a lot of things that are happening that the legality is sort of really squishy.
Is ICE taking people from courthouses like we're hearing about in other cities? Is that happening here in Florida? Yeah.
Yes, it is happening. It's happening. Of course, it's happening in Florida. People are going to ICE check-ins. ICE is texting them, oh, there's a problem with your ankle monitor. And so they'll go to their check-in, and then they're just detained on the spot. ICE uses all kinds of ruses and lies to get people to go complete their check-in process. People who are there's like alternative to detention process where they're like ICE is monitoring people who are in the country who are going through deportation or removal proceedings who aren't detained throughout that process because no one needs to be detained throughout that process. It's an unnecessary and inhumane system in the first place, but yes.
Can I give some context on the ICE check-in, just because some people might not understand? So when a person is in the US and they maybe have an asylum claim, they are seeking an asylum, there is some time that process is going to be under review. And unfortunately, we have a backlog, right? We have not enough immigration officers to review processes, so that the processes take many years. And the one thing that has been the practice is for individuals, instead of being in detention, being released either with an ankle monitor or not. And they are given dates that they have to show up back to ICE office to show, to check in. What are you doing? Are you okay? Like, do you have any records? Did you commit any crime? Do we have any reasons to be concerned? Do we need to show you to detention? So people are asked to present themselves to those check-ins so they can continue their process. So you imagine that people who are committed to do that are doing so in good faith. Their process is ongoing. And that is what makes it so horrific, is that when people are receiving letters saying, oh, we need to update your address. And people go there. These are our neighbors, people that I know by name. They receive that letter and they go there to do their check-in. And that's when they are taken. This is just absurd. How can you trust in a judicial system? How can you trust the credibility of a process in which you are showing up as you are asked and you are taken? So it's absolutely happening. And the reason why I want to describe the process is just that you also understand that people are not going there to court to be judged for committing something horrific. They are there to do a check-in at times. Of course, there is also the court cases, but understand that the scope is so much more gruesome than we even see on TV.
I'll just add to that too. I had an opportunity in May to be in relationship with a family who the wife went to a check-in. She's a resident of the Tampa area. And on Mother's Day, she was unable to be with her child who was still breastfeeding and had medical complications because when she went to go to her check-in, she was detained at that time and deported. The family didn't know where she was. They finally got contact with her, but this was her first Mother's Day, and she was separated from her child and married to a U.S. citizen as well. So it is absolutely happening. People in our communities are experiencing this, and it's frightening.
It is very frightening. Thank you for your responses. All right, I think we have time for one more question. So can you provide a comment or a response to some of the people who may say, why don't immigrants come into this country the right way? What is the right way?
I can just take a stab at it. So there's not a right way to come into the country. Like Renata was saying, people did come the right way. They came, you can approach the border and say, I request asylum, I fear persecution in my country of origin. Like, that is the legal way. And when people are doing that, they're either being put in detention or not being, they're supposed to get a reasonable fear interview and a credible fear interview and go through the process of applying for asylum. There's certain grounds for which you can be granted asylum if you fear certain types of things, certain types of persecution. And that's just for asylum, but there are other types of immigration relief as well. People are not being allowed to get through the system. The process takes 7 or 8 years to get through for asylum, and in that time, people are now being deported without final orders of removal. We're seeing a lot of people being arrested even when they present ICE with work papers. If you have authorization to work in this country, then you're here legally. You might not have final documentation of your immigration status yet, but you're going through the process the right way. You have applied, you have told the government you're here, I'm applying for this type of visa, and they said, okay, we'll put you on the list, and you have to wait your turn. But then now, in the meantime, ICE and Florida Highway Patrol and all these 287G deputized state officers are going around arresting people regardless of whether they came here the right way, regardless of where they're at in their process. And they're putting people in detention, taking them away from attorneys, away from anyone who's able to help them defend against deportation. They're pressuring people to sign deportation orders. One of the people who's in the Everglades facility is this man with a mental impairment, and he thought he was signing, he doesn't speak English, he thought he was signing a form to get a blanket because they had the AC really cold that day, but he didn't know it, but he was signing a voluntary departure form. They're just tricking people into signing these forms without letting them actually read in their own language what the form says, or coercing them into signing it because they're like literally being tortured and forced to sign these forms. So people are trying to come through the right way, and that's just not actually an option in reality. That doesn't protect you from deportation.
Please join me in giving our panelists a big thank you for being here tonight, but also for all that you do to fight for immigrants in Florida. Thank you. Maybe you're able to stick around a little bit longer after to answer. There were a couple questions we didn't get to. Finally, I want to remind you, we have red cards in the lobby. Grab some. We also recorded this event tonight, so this information doesn't have to stay here. If you feel empowered and informed from this and want to share it, please do. It will be on the League of Women Voters of the St. Petersburg Area YouTube page, and we will share it on our socials and with all of you. With that, thank you for your willingness to join us in the fight, and I'm going to hand it to Tanya very quick as well.
I have just one quick thing. I want to commend all of the panelists for being here tonight and for the incredible work that you're doing for immigration and for people that we care about in our community. I am sure it's not easy. I'm sure it's difficult work. I'm sure it is mentally challenging as well. And I will say for all of us, as the professor said, it can be overwhelming, and to take the piece that speaks to you the most and to do something with it. And with everything that's going on in our league, we decided it would be a good idea to invite Professor Stephen Neely from USF to do a Zoom presentation for us on the politics of stress. And that, we're all sitting in this room, we're advocates, we get excited, we get energized, but it can also be emotionally draining, and we do need to find ways to protect our mental health, to put that oxygen mask on ourselves first, and then be able to go out and do some more incredible work. So if you're interested in that Zoom, it's on our website, lwvnorthpinellas.org. It's Professor Stephen Neely, and it's September 17th, that's a Wednesday, and it's at 5:30 p.m. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here tonight. Again, really big thanks to our panelists. We've really appreciated you and your time. We really appreciate all of you coming. We hope that you are inspired and empowered to take action. Our panelists provided some resources. Renata shared the FLIC website, flic.org, that you can visit to look into volunteering with RAISE. Amy mentioned the accompaniment training. I think that's also on the FLIC website. You can donate to some of the organizations mentioned. You can come to the Alligator Alcatraz vigils, the Everglades Detention Center, sorry. And thanks all for coming tonight. We really appreciate you. Have a good rest of your evening.